The sound of hoofbeats thundered through the night as Sarah Davenport clutched her shotgun closer to her chest, scanning the darkness for any movement near her small homestead. The year was 1878, and life in the Wyoming Territory was as unforgiving as the land itself. 3 days ago, Outlaws had taken her 6-month-old son, leaving nothing but a ransom note and a trail of dust heading west toward the mountains. Sarah's hands trembled as she loaded the final shell into her shotgun. Her husband had been dead 8 months now, killed by a stray bullet during a bank robbery in the nearby town of Willow Creek. She'd been alone since then, just her and little Henry, trying to keep their small ranch running. Now, with Henry gone, she felt a hollowness that threatened to consume her. The sound of approaching horses made her raise her weapon, ready to defend what little she had left. A lone rider appeared in the moonlight, followed by 2 others. Sarah recognized the lead rider immediately: Thomas Abernathy, owner of the neighboring cattle ranch. He'd been kind to her after James' death, checking in occasionally, bringing supplies when the winter was harsh. "Miss Sarah," Thomas called out, dismounting his chestnut stallion. His tall frame cast a long shadow in the moonlight. "I heard about what happened. The whole town's talking." Sarah lowered her shotgun slightly. "Then you know they want $500 by next week, money I don't have." Thomas removed his hat, revealing hair the color of straw and eyes that had seen too much for his 30 years. "I know, that's why I'm here." He gestured to the men behind him. "These are my best hands, we're going after them." "I can't ask you to do that, Thomas. The Blackwell gang is dangerous, they've killed before. You didn't ask." Thomas stepped closer, his voice lowering. "I'm offering, no mother should have to lose her child." Something in his eyes told Sarah he knew pain similar to hers. "I'll bring him back, Sarah, I promise you that." Sarah felt tears welling up for the first time since the kidnapping. She'd been too shocked, too angry to cry until now. "Why would you risk your life for us?" Thomas placed his hat back on his head, his jaw set with determination. "Because it's the right thing to do. Now, do you have anything of the boys? Something my tracker can use to follow their scent?" Sarah nodded, hurrying inside the small cabin. She returned with Henry's small blanket, still carrying his sweet baby smell. As she handed it over, her fingers brushed against Thomas's calloused hand. "Please," she whispered, "he's all I have left." Thomas took the blanket gently. "I'll bring him back." The words weren't just a promise, they were a vow. As the men prepared to leave, Sarah made a sudden decision. "I'm coming with you." Thomas turned, surprise evident on his face. "Miss Sarah, this is no journey for a woman." Sarah cut him off, her green eyes flashing with determination. "This is my son we're talking about. I buried my husband, I won't bury my child. I'm coming, Mr. Abernathy. You can either help me or watch me follow behind." The two stared at each other for a long moment before Thomas's expression softened into something like respect. "We leave at first light." "Pack only what you need. It'll be hard riding." "I'll be ready." Dawn broke cold and clear over the Wyoming plains. Sarah had barely slept, spending most of the night preparing. She changed from her dress into a pair of her late husband's trousers and a simple shirt, knowing they'd be more practical for the journey ahead. Her long auburn hair was braided tightly down her back. Thomas arrived with 4 men, an older tracker named Charlie, 2 ranch hands called Bill and Michael, and a young half-Mexican cowboy named Raphael, who was known as the best shot in 3 counties. Thomas's eyebrows raised slightly at Sarah's attire, but he said nothing as she secured her bedroll to her husband's old mare. "The trail leads west toward the Bighorn Mountains," Charlie announced, examining the ground where the outlaws had camped briefly. 4 men, maybe 5. One of them rides a horse with a distinctive limp in the front right hoof. "Blackwell's second in command," Thomas nodded. "That would be Dixon." Sarah mounted her horse, adjusting the rifle in its scabbard. "How do you know so much about these outlaws, Mr. Abernathy?" A shadow passed over Thomas's face. "Our paths have crossed before. Let's leave it at that for now." They rode hard that first day, stopping only to water the horses and allow Charlie to check the trail. Sarah kept pace without complaint, though her muscles screamed in protest after hours in the saddle. By nightfall, they had covered nearly 30 miles, entering the foothills where the plains began to give way to rougher terrain. "We'll make camp here," Thomas announced as they reached a small creek sheltered by cottonwood trees. "They're heading into Blackwell's territory now. We need to be careful." As the men set up camp, Sarah approached Thomas, who was studying a worn map by the light of a small fire. "You never answered my question properly," she said softly. "Why are you really doing this?" Thomas folded the map slowly, his eyes fixed on the flames. "I had a wife once and a daughter." His voice was so quiet Sarah had to lean closer to hear. 3 years ago, while I was away in Cheyenne, a group of raiders hit our homestead. By the time I got back, he trailed off, unable to finish. Sarah felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. "I'm so sorry, Thomas." Emma would have been 6 this year. He finally looked up, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "I couldn't save them, but I can try to save your boy." Sarah reached out, her hand covering his. "We will save him." For a moment, something passed between them, understanding, perhaps, or the recognition of shared pain. Then Thomas cleared his throat and stood. "Get some rest, Miss Sarah. Tomorrow will be harder than today." The next morning dawned with a light drizzle that soon turned the trail to mud. Charlie led them higher into the foothills, following tracks that would have been invisible to less experienced eyes. By midday, the rain had stopped, but dark clouds still hung low over the mountains. "They're moving faster now," Charlie announced after examining a campsite the Outlaws had abandoned. "Probably trying to reach their hideout before we catch up." "How far ahead are they?" Sarah asked, cradling Henry's blanket, which she'd kept with her. "A day, maybe less." "The good news is the little one seems to be alive and well. Found some scraps of food that would only be for a baby." Relief washed over Sarah, followed quickly by renewed determination. "Then we keep going." As they pressed on, the terrain grew steeper and more treacherous. Twice they had to backtrack when the trail led to impassable ravines. By late afternoon, exhaustion was evident in every face, but no one suggested stopping. "There's a trading post about 3 miles ahead," Thomas said as they paused to rest the horses. "Run by an old mountain man named Jeremiah. If anyone knows where Blackwell might be holed up, it'll be him." The trading post was little more than a crude log cabin with a stable attached, nestled in a small valley between 2 ridges. As they approached, an elderly man with a long white beard emerged, a shotgun cradled in his arms. "That's far enough, strangers," he called out. "State your business." Thomas raised his hands slightly. "Jeremiah, it's Thomas Abernathy. We're tracking the Blackwell gang. They've taken this woman's child." The old man lowered his weapon slightly, squinting at the group. "Thomas." "Been a while, boy." His gaze shifted to Sarah. "Sorry about your young'un, madam. Blackwell's a mean one." "Have they passed this way?" Thomas asked as they dismounted. Jeremiah nodded, leaning his shotgun against the porch post. "Yesterday afternoon, 5 men and a baby." Blackwell was in a foul mood. Baby was crying something fierce. Sarah's heart clenched. Was he all right? Seemed healthy enough, just unhappy about his company. They bought some milk and hardtack, then headed up toward Eagle's Pass. Thomas frowned. "That's Sioux territory." "Aye, but Blackwell's got some kind of arrangement with them. They leave him be as long as he doesn't bring trouble their way." They accepted Jeremiah's offer of hot coffee and a place to rest the horses briefly. Inside the cabin, Sarah noticed a crude map on the wall showing the surrounding mountains. "Eagle's Pass," she said, pointing to a narrow gap between 2 peaks. "How far?" "Day's ride in good weather," Jeremiah replied, "but there's a storm brewing. You folks might want to wait it out here." Thomas shook his head. "We can't afford to lose any more time." Jeremiah studied him for a moment. "This is about more than just the woman's baby for you, isn't it, Thomas?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "Blackwell has something that doesn't belong to him. I aim to take it back." They departed within the hour, Jeremiah's warnings about the coming storm ringing in their ears. The sky had darkened ominously, and the wind carried the smell of rain. Sarah rode beside Thomas now, noticing the new tension in his shoulders. "What did Jeremiah mean?" she asked quietly. "About this being more than just about Henry for you." Thomas was silent for so long Sarah thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely audible over the wind. Frank Blackwell was one of the raiders who attacked my home. He's the one who killed my Emma. Sarah inhaled sharply. Thomas, you should have told me. Would it have changed anything? You'd still want your son back. Of course, but Sarah hesitated. I wouldn't want you risking your life for revenge. Thomas's blue eyes met hers. This isn't about revenge, Sarah, it's about justice. And about making sure no one else loses what I lost. His gaze softened slightly. What you might lose. Before Sarah could respond, the first heavy raindrops began to fall. Within minutes, they were caught in a downpour that reduced visibility to mere yards. Thunder crashed overhead as lightning split the darkening sky. We need shelter, Raphael called out, fighting to control his spooked horse. Thomas pointed to a rocky outcropping ahead. There might be caves, they urged their horses forward through the worsening storm. The outcropping indeed concealed a shallow cave, just deep enough to shelter the group and their mounts. As they dismounted and led the horses inside, Sarah noticed Thomas wincing. You're hurt, she said, moving closer. Thomas shook his head. Old injury, axe up in the damp. The others busied themselves with starting a small fire and seeing to the horses. Sarah pulled Thomas aside. Let me see. Reluctantly, he removed his duster, revealing a dark stain on his shirt just below his left shoulder. Sarah helped him remove the shirt, gasping softly at the sight of an old bullet wound, the scar puckered and angry-looking. Happened during a cattle drive 2 years back, Thomas explained as Sarah cleaned the wound with water from her canteen. Rustlers, bullets still in there somewhere. It's infected, Sarah murmured, reaching for her pack. I have some herbs that might help draw out the poison. As she worked, applying a poultice of herbs she'd prepared before leaving home, Thomas watched her face in the firelight. You're good at this, he said softly. My father was a doctor back east, Sarah replied, concentrating on her task. He taught me what he could before consumption took him. It's what brought us west, hoping the air would cure him. And your husband, how did you meet him? A small smile touched Sarah's lips. James was driving a wagon train. I was 19, traveling with my father. James was kind, steady. When my father died just after we reached Wyoming, James offered to marry me, give me a home. Did you love him? Thomas asked, then immediately looked embarrassed. Forgive me. That's not my business. I grew to love him, Sarah said honestly. He was a good man, not passionate perhaps, but good. She finished securing the bandage around Thomas's shoulder. And your wife, what was she like? Thomas's eyes grew distant. Mary was sunshine. Always laughing, always seeing the good in everything. Even out here where life was hard, she found beauty. He swallowed hard. Our daughter had her smile. Sarah's hand lingered on his arm. I'm sorry, Thomas, truly. For a moment they sat in silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the storm raging outside. Then Charlie approached, clearing his throat. Storm's likely to last through the night. We should take turns keeping watch, just in case. Thomas nodded, pulling his shirt back on. I'll take first watch. No, Sarah said firmly. You need to rest and let that shoulder heal. I'll take first watch. Thomas looked like he wanted to argue but seemed to think better of it. Wake me in 2 hours then. Sarah nodded, though she had no intention of doing so. Thomas needed rest more than she did. As the others settled down for the night, Sarah positioned herself near the cave entrance, rifle across her lap. Outside, the storm continued to rage, lightning occasionally illuminating the valley below. Her thoughts turned to Henry, out there somewhere in this terrible storm. Was he warm? Had they fed him? The thought of her baby crying for her, surrounded by rough men who cared nothing for him, made her heart ache with a pain so fierce she could barely breathe. He'll be all right, came Thomas's quiet voice beside her. Sarah startled, she hadn't heard him approach. You should be resting, she admonished. Couldn't sleep. Thomas settled beside her, his shoulder brushing against hers. Your boy is valuable to them, they won't harm him. I keep thinking about how scared he must be, Sarah whispered. He's never been away from me for a night, not since he was born. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Children are resilient, and tomorrow we'll find him. He hesitated, then added, after we get him back, what will you do? Sarah hadn't allowed herself to think that far ahead. Try to keep the ranch going, I suppose. It's all we have. It's hard ranching alone. I don't have much choice. Thomas seemed to be weighing his words carefully. There are always choices, Sarah. Before she could ask what he meant, a sound from outside caught their attention: hoofbeats, approaching slowly through the storm. Thomas motioned for Sarah to stay back as he peered out into the darkness, his hand on his revolver. A lone rider appeared through the rain, slumped forward in the saddle. As lightning flashed, Sarah caught a glimpse of blood staining the rider's shirt. "It's one of Blackwell's men," Thomas whispered, recognizing the distinctive hat, "and he's hurt bad." Thomas signaled to the others, now awake and alert, then stepped out into the rain, gun drawn. "That's far enough, mister." The wounded man raised his head, revealing a young face barely out of boyhood. "Help, please," he gasped before sliding from the saddle to the muddy ground. Thomas approached cautiously, keeping his gun trained on the fallen man. Sarah followed, medical instincts overriding caution. The young outlaw had a deep knife wound in his side, bleeding freely. "What happened to you, boy?" Thomas demanded as Sarah examined the wound. "Blackwell," the young man gasped. "Got in a fight about the baby." Sarah's hands stilled. "My son, what about my son?" "Blackwell, gonna sell him to some rich folks in Montana. I said, we should bring him back, not right. Taking a baby." He coughed, blood speckling his lips. Blackwell didn't like that. Sarah and Thomas exchanged glances. "Where are they now?" Thomas asked. "Cabin, north side of Eagles Pass, 10 miles from here." The young outlaw grabbed Thomas's arm with surprising strength. "The baby, he's sick, fever." "Blackwell don't care." Sarah felt her blood run cold. "We need to go, now." "Storm's too dangerous," Charlie warned. "Horses could break a leg in this terrain at night." "My son is sick," Sarah cried. "We can't wait." Thomas looked torn, glancing between Sarah and the storm outside. Finally, he made a decision. "Charlie, you and the boys stay here with this one. See if you can keep him alive till morning. Sarah and I will go ahead." "Thomas, that's madness," Raphael protested. "Maybe so, but that baby might not have till morning." Thomas turned to Sarah. "Get your things, we leave in 5 minutes." They rode out into the storm, the rain beating against them like tiny bullets. Thomas led the way, somehow finding a path through the darkness. Sarah followed closely, her heart pounding with fear for Henry and with something else she couldn't quite name, a growing admiration for the man riding ahead of her, risking everything for a woman and child he barely knew. After what seemed like hours of slow, treacherous travel, the rain finally began to slacken. The first gray light of dawn revealed a mountain pass ahead, cutting between two towering peaks. "Eagles Pass," Thomas said, reining in his horse beside a cluster of pine trees. "The cabin should be on the other side." They dismounted, tethering their horses in the shelter of the trees. Thomas checked his revolvers, then handed Sarah a small derringer. "Keep this close. With luck, we won't need to use them." "And if luck isn't with us?" Sarah asked, tucking the small gun into her belt. Thomas's expression was grim. "Then we make our own luck." They approached the pass on foot, moving as quietly as possible over the wet ground. As they reached the summit, the valley below came into view, and with it, a small cabin nestled against the mountainside, smoke rising from its chimney. Thomas pulled Sarah behind a boulder as 2 men emerged from the cabin, rifles in hand. "Blackwell's sentries," he whispered. "We need to get past them somehow." Sarah scanned the area, noticing a narrow ravine that seemed to lead down toward the back of the cabin. "There," she pointed. "If we can reach that ravine, we might be able to approach from behind." Thomas nodded appreciatively. "Good eyes." "Let's go while they're distracted." They made their way carefully down the steep slope, using trees and rocks for cover. The ravine was treacherous with loose shale and mud from the recent rain, but it did indeed lead toward the rear of the cabin. As they neared the bottom, the faint sound of a baby's cry reached them. "Henry," Sarah breathed, her heart leaping. "He's alive." Thomas put a restraining hand on her arm. "Easy now, we need to be smart about this." They crept closer to the cabin, staying low. Through a small, dirty window, Sarah could see into what appeared to be a back room. A makeshift cradle sat in one corner, and in it, wrapped in blankets, lay Henry. "There he is," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "Oh, Thomas, he looks so pale." Thomas surveyed the cabin. I can see Blackwell and one other man inside. The sentries make 4, there should be one more. As if in answer to his question, a 5th man emerged from a small stable nearby, leading a horse. They're getting ready to move out, Thomas muttered. We need to act now. He outlined a simple plan. Create a distraction at the front of the cabin to draw out the men, then Sarah would slip in the back and grab Henry while Thomas dealt with Blackwell. Be careful, Sarah said, gripping his arm. I couldn't bear it if, I'll be fine, Thomas assured her, his hand briefly covering hers. Get ready to move as soon as you hear the commotion. Thomas disappeared into the trees, circling around toward the front of the cabin. Sarah waited, heart pounding, eyes fixed on the window where she could see her son. Minutes stretched like hours until finally, a series of gunshots rang out from the direction of the stables. The reaction was immediate. The 2 sentries ran toward the sound, followed moments later by the man who had been in the stable. Sarah saw Blackwell and his remaining companion grab their weapons and move toward the front door. This was her chance. Sarah darted from cover, reaching the back of the cabin in seconds. The window was small, but she was slender enough to squeeze through with some effort. She landed quietly on the dirt floor inside, immediately moving to the cradle. Henry lay there, his face flushed with fever, but his eyes opened at her approach. Recognition dawned in his tiny face, and he reached for her with a weak cry. "SHH, my love," Sarah whispered, gathering him into her arms. "Mama's here now." Outside, the gunfire had intensified. Sarah cradled Henry against her chest, wrapping him securely in his blanket, then moved toward the window. Before she could reach it, the cabin door burst open. Frank Blackwell stood there, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. His eyes widened at the sight of Sarah holding the baby. "Well, well," he drawled, raising his revolver. "Looks like I caught myself a mama bear." Sarah backed away, one hand protectively cradling Henry's head. "Please," she said, "he's sick, he needs medicine." "That baby's worth $500 to me," Blackwell snarled, "and I aim to collect." "That baby isn't worth anything to you dead," came Thomas's voice from the doorway. He stood there, one revolver trained steadily on Blackwell's back. "And neither are you." Blackwell stiffened. "I know that voice." He turned slowly. "Abernathy, heard you were still kicking around these parts." "Drop the gun, Frank." Thomas's voice was cold as winter. "It's over." Blackwell's laugh was ugly. "Over? It ain't over till I say it's over." His eyes narrowed. "You still sore about that wife of yours. She died real pretty, you know, begging for mercy." Sarah saw something dangerous flash in Thomas's eyes, a killing rage barely contained. "Thomas," she said softly, "don't let him bait you. Henry needs us both." For a moment, the cabin was utterly silent save for Henry's whimpering. Then Blackwell made his move, swinging his gun toward Thomas. 2 shots rang out simultaneously. Blackwell staggered backward, a look of surprise on his face as he collapsed to the floor. Thomas lowered his smoking revolver, then stumbled slightly. Sarah gasped, seeing the blood spreading across his left side. "Thomas." "I'm all right," he said, though his face had gone pale. "Just a graze. We need to get out of here. The others won't be far behind." They exited through the back window, Thomas helping Sarah and Henry through before following with a grimace of pain. They made their way up the ravine as quickly as they could, Thomas growing visibly weaker with each step. "Just a little farther," Sarah encouraged, supporting him with her free arm while cradling Henry with the other. They reached their horses just as shouts erupted from the cabin below. Thomas practically fell into his saddle while Sarah mounted more carefully, securing Henry against her chest with a length of cloth. "Ride," Thomas gasped. "North, there's a settlement, 20 miles, doctor there." They rode hard, pushing the tired horses as much as they dared in the treacherous terrain. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit gradually faded, Blackwell's remaining men either unwilling or unable to follow. By midday, they had put considerable distance between themselves and Eagle's Pass. Thomas's condition had worsened, his face ashen, his shirt soaked with blood. "We need to stop," Sarah insisted as they reached a small stream. "You'll bleed to death if we don't tend that wound." Thomas didn't argue, which worried Sarah more than anything. He practically fell from his horse as they dismounted. Sarah laid Henry down on a soft patch of grass, then helped Thomas to sit with his back against a tree. The bullet had torn through his side, missing vital organs but causing significant blood loss. Sarah cleaned the wound as best she could with water from the stream, then tore strips from her petticoat to bind it tightly. "How's the boy?" Thomas asked weakly as she worked. Sarah glanced at Henry, who had fallen into an exhausted sleep. "His fever's still high, but he's breathing easier." "He needs a doctor, same as you, Sarah," Thomas said, catching her hand. "If I don't make it, don't," she cut him off fiercely. "Don't you dare talk like that, Thomas Abernathy. You promised to bring my son back, and you did. Now I'm promising you'll live to see him grow up." Something flickered in Thomas's eyes, hope, perhaps, or a deeper emotion. "Is that a fact?" "It is," Sarah said firmly, "so you'd better keep fighting." They rested for an hour, giving the horses a chance to recover and allowing Sarah to coax some water into both Henry and Thomas. When they set off again, Sarah insisted Thomas ride with her, his arms around her waist to keep him steady. Henry remained securely bound against her chest, his fever still high but no worse than before. The miles passed slowly, each one a testament to their determination. By late afternoon, they caught sight of a small settlement in the distance, just a cluster of buildings in a valley, but to Sarah, it looked like salvation. As they rode into town, people emerged from buildings to stare at the strange sight. They presented a woman in men's clothing with a baby bound to her chest, supporting a half-conscious, blood-soaked man. "Doctor," Sarah called out. "We need a doctor." An older man stepped forward. "I'm Dr. Wilson." "Bring him to my office." What followed was a blur of activity. The doctor tended to Thomas first, removing the bullet and stitching the wound closed while Sarah sat nearby, cradling Henry. Once Thomas was stable, the doctor turned his attention to the baby, diagnosing a severe chest cold but nothing more serious. "A few days of proper care and medicine, and he'll be right as rain," Dr. Wilson assured Sarah. "Your husband is the lucky one. Another hour and he might not have made it." Sarah didn't correct the doctor's assumption about her relationship to Thomas. Instead, she took a chair between the two beds where her son and her rescuer now rested and allowed herself to finally give in to exhaustion. She woke to the gentle touch of a hand on her shoulder. Thomas was awake, his blue eyes clearer than they had been in days. "Henry?" he asked immediately. "Better," Sarah smiled, gesturing to where the baby slept peacefully in a borrowed cradle. "His fever broke during the night. The doctor says he'll recover completely." Relief washed over Thomas's face. "Good, that's good." Sarah took his hand, holding it between both of hers. "Thank you, Thomas, for everything. I made a promise," he said simply. "Yes, you did." Sarah hesitated, then continued. "Back at the cave, you mentioned choices. What did you mean?" Thomas's gaze held her steadily. "I meant that when all this is over, when you're ready, you could choose not to be alone anymore." Sarah's breath caught. "Thomas, I know it's too soon," he said quickly. "You've been through too much. But someday, when you're ready, I'd like to call on you properly, if you'd allow it." Sarah found herself smiling, a real smile that reached all the way to her heart for the first time in too long. "I think I'd like that very much." 3 days later, they left the settlement, accompanied by Charlie and the others who had caught up with them. Henry, fully recovered, babbled happily from his perch in a sling across Sarah's chest. Thomas rode beside her, still weak but healing well. As they crossed back into familiar territory, Sarah glanced at the man beside her, this man who had risked everything to save her son, who had faced his own demons to help her confront hers. She thought of the long, difficult road ahead, of the challenges of building a life in this harsh land. But for the first time since James' death, the future didn't seem quite so daunting. When they reached the fork in the road where their paths would separate Thomas to his ranch, Sarah to hers, they paused. The others rode ahead tactfully, giving them a moment of privacy. "I'll come by tomorrow," Thomas said. "To check on you both." Sarah nodded, suddenly shy. "We'd like that." Thomas leaned over, his hand gently cupping her cheek. "You're the bravest woman I've ever known, Sarah Davenport." Before she could respond, he leaned closer and kissed her softly. It was brief, almost chaste, but it contained a promise of all that might come. As Thomas rode away, Sarah touched her lips, a smile spreading across her face. Henry gurgled happily against her chest, reaching up to pat her cheek with his tiny hand. "Yes, my love," she whispered to her son. "I think we're going to be just fine." 1 year later, wildflowers bloomed across the rolling hills of the combined Abernathy-Davenport ranch. Sarah stood on the porch of the new house Thomas had built for them, watching as her husband taught Henry, now a sturdy toddler of 18 months, to pet a new foal. The boy's laughter rang out across the yard, joined by Thomas's deeper chuckle. Sarah rested her hands on her rounded belly, feeling the new life stirring within her. Their daughter would be born when the first snow fell, according to Dr. Wilson. Thomas looked up, catching her eye across the yard. The love in his gaze still took her breath away. Sometimes this strong, gentle man who had ridden into danger to save her son and ended up saving her heart as well. "Mama," Henry called, waving excitedly. "Come see." Sarah stepped off the porch, moving toward her family, the family she had nearly lost, the family she had fought to keep, the family that had grown in ways she could never have imagined on that terrible night when outlaws had taken her baby and a cowboy had promised to bring him back.